Earlier on, Ben Thomas said that he had the graveyard slot after lunch on a Friday, but there is no teacher in the world who would wish to have last lesson in the afternoon on Friday. Now, if you were a class of adolescent boys, at this moment I'd be throwing open all the windows and making you do star jumps or run up and down on the spot just to generate a bit of energy. But you, of course, are sophisticated, determined folk by your very presence here, so I'm going to eschew that. However, if you do feel the need just to stretch or move, then please do. I shall take it as a compliment. There is an American neuroscientist called Leonard Sachs, who, among many other things, did a piece of work around optimal temperature for children in schools. And this is an extensive piece of research. Whether or not it holds water is entirely another matter. But the outcome of his findings is that girls optimally need a warmer environment and boys a cooler environment. And he has actually devised what he calls the 6-degree rule. It's as significant as that. Now, this is quite a warm room. So the ladies here, who are a majority, I expect to see focused, attentive, and sharp for the next few minutes. The men can just fall asleep. It's been legitimized by Dr. Sachs. Before I go any further, let me thank Tatler for putting on this day, both for the conception of the idea on this inaugural event, but also for the comprehensive nature of the program and the range of topics covered, which I think has been engaging and on occasion enlightening. There are all kinds of things that one could pick up. There's just one, however, that I do wish to do, and that's endorse Emma and Eddie in their presentation just now, in their conversation. Nowhere in the world does boarding as well as we do in Britain, and I've been all over the world, and I've seen the most extraordinary events where boarding schools really are just bolted on hostels, soulless places where young people spend the night. Or, for example, at a top-end American school I visited some years ago, where I was staggered to discover that the staff accommodation policy was that at the age of 23, 24, you went into a small boarding house and ran it to earn enough points to gain a nicer faculty house down the hill far away from the children. Now, the British boarding school tradition has at its heart, has at its centre, experienced teachers who earn the right to become house parents or to become boarding house masters and house mistresses. And there's a fundamental difference in the British system, and at its best provides the most wonderful, transformative educational opportunity for children. I could go on at great length, I won't, but it is well worth looking at a boarding option at any age of child, and especially, I think, as they grow older. However, that is not my text for today. As Mary has introduced, I'm going to say a word or two in a minute about what we should be doing as parents. But before that, I want to say a word or two about Eton's entry procedure. And I want to do this in the context of what we've been hearing today, because there are 2 or 3 themes that I think are worth emphasizing, or perhaps phrasing in a slightly different way. And I say this as someone who has for years been associated with Eton, because those of you who are really feeling the pressure of pre-tests and the whole feeding frenzy that goes with it can point the finger at me, or at least at Eton College, and blame Eton, because it was Eton pretty much that invented the pre-test 13, 14 years ago, something like that. Why? And I just want to talk through the reasoning to try and explain why this landscape has changed. Let's rewind 15 plus years ago. For entry to traditional public schools, that's at the age of 13, the only means of entry was by the common entrance exam, taken in May, or usually early June, in the year children were due to start school in September. So it's only a matter of a handful of months. And in practical terms, as has already been pointed out, it was actually a matter of weeks in terms of securing the place. For many decades, it worked reasonably well in its own terms. Eton's system of entry was almost Masonic in its secrecy and complexity. You had to know a housemaster, not a school. You didn't register through the school, or at least you made an administrative log with the school, but your human contact was with an individual housemaster. So you had to have an entree to that person. You had to know someone who knew him or know him yourself. and it was very much for boys in the know. You would have a place in this house, and the process of common entrance was simply a means of identifying that you weren't entirely a gibbering idiot and you could be warmly embraced and taken into the school. The problem with that system was twofold. First of all, of itself, it excluded vast numbers of families who weren't tuned in to the old boy network. It was a very exclusive arrangement. And the second thing was that it put weight on the common entrance exam. And as the years went past, it became more and more difficult for senior schools and indeed prep school heads to engineer the situation to advantage. That is to say, to ensure that the numbers matched up. About 14 years ago, there was one particular year at Eton when something like 45 boys had to be failed at common entrance in June because there weren't enough spaces for them, which was carnage for the families, many of whom did not have backup plans or an alternative arrangement and needed a place for the next September. And that's where the idea of the pretest came from, and it was squarely to do with giving families more notice and a better sense of where they stood. And it was particularly relevant in the context of rapidly growing demand. When I started at Eton in 2002, there were something like just on 600 serious candidates for the 240 places available at the age of 13. That's 600 candidates who went through the whole process. By last year, that had reached 1,200. And most of the competitive, successful schools face that kind of dilemma. How do you make a system that's as fair as you can make it and as robust as you can make it? So the pre-testing idea was simply that children would be asked to come for interview and do a test at the age of 11, at the end of which parents would get a red light, an amber light, or a green light. And a green light meant, we think this boy would do very well at Eton and would thrive. Subject to him passing common entrance, he's in. Over the last 2 or 3 years, the common entrance failure rate at Eton, now bear in mind what it was 15 years ago, the common entrance failure rate has been 0, because the work has been effectively done in advance, in collaboration with prep school heads. A red light would mean, sorry, it's a tough one, we know, but we don't think this is going to work out, and we're giving you 2 years' notice that there are other routes you should follow. And an amber light places you on the reserve list, the waiting list, which is an active thing, as it is in most schools, because as we heard earlier on, there's a lot of shift and change and transition. So each year, about 40 boys would be successful in getting places at Eton off the waiting list. And it's an active list, because the admissions team at Eton would stay in regular contact with the prep schools to hear how boys are developing. So it's a dynamic process. I'm often asked, what are the things that a school like Eton would look for in boys when they're aged 10, 11? Goodness, somebody's so terribly young, and it is. Well, we thought about this a lot. And what we came up was a 3-part process. Part of it was to do with the computer test, which we had devised for us by the University of Durham. It's a bespoke test, and we've trialled it before it came into regular use, and it is changed in a regular way. And we know from tested experience that it's a difficult process, it's a difficult test to second guess. We happen to know that a number of candidates on return to their prep schools have been quizzed to the nth degree about exactly what the questions are, but because of the nature of the way the test is devised, it's extremely difficult for any child or adult, for that matter, to be able to do that. And that's intentional. It's meant to stop the mugging up and the preparing for the test, which is exactly what we don't want. We wanted to see just what the innate ability of a child was. But there's a second part of that process too, and that is the interview. Crucial that the interview should be with the child without parents being present. I'm a fan of parents. I love parents dearly, but they almost always have a deleterious influence on their child. Either way, in fact, Mary was honest enough to suggest it with her 4-year-old. You know, shine, damn you, shine. And that is an inevitable and natural parental reaction. Children on their own are forthcoming and revealing. I'll come back to that in a moment. And the third point is the prep school report, or the primary school report, a letter from the head and a detailed analysis of what the child is capable of doing. So we get a sense of the current performance of a child in all spheres. The actual computer test is more indicative of what the underlying ability is. These three things are pretty much evenly treated, and it's a triangulation. It's trying to get a complex picture of a child. Years ago, when I worked in a direct grant grammar school, the entrance procedure was incredibly simple and swift. There were 120 places. There was an exam in English, one in maths. The marks were added up. You would take a ruler, put it under the 120th candidate, draw a line, and that was it. The whole thing must have taken about 3 minutes. And there was a blissful clarity and simplicity about it. But it didn't necessarily produce the right outcomes for the right children. And at Eton, and I'm using Eton as an example because I know this is true of other schools, a huge amount of time and effort is put into the admissions process. Not that it is forensically accurate, as we've heard other people say, but it is certainly conscientious. The way it works at Eton is that 5 people independent of each other, of whom the headmaster is one, will review all 1,200 applications. We'll look at the interview notes, we'll look at the test scores, we'll read the prep school report and come up with an overall mark, a grade for that particular child, taking everything into account, based on experience. It's an intuitive thing as much as it is a practical thing. At a given date, the 5 marks are aggregated to form a long list. The team of 5 then meet for 2 days and go down the entire list arguing the merits of each case. So it's a thorough, time-consuming business. And at the very least, as you go through this, the choppy waters of admission to senior school, I hope you will take on board the fact that the people at the other end really are putting a lot of time and effort into this, even if it is not entirely accurate on all occasions. It's pretty accurate most of the time, I have to say. So what are the things that we were looking for in boys? Well, there are 3 things, I think. First, that any boy wishing to come to Eton or a school like Eton should be academically competent enough, not just to survive, but actually to thrive. We weren't looking for Einsteins, though occasionally it was nice to have 1 or 2, and we did have them. But we were looking for boys who would at least be able to keep up with the flow. And as a point of reference, the academic range at Eton is broader than that of a typical grammar school in the 11+. Makes it the more remarkable how good the results are at the other end, I think. The second thing, however, just as important as the first, is that any boy should have something else to bring to the party, a skill, enthusiasm, something that shows the lights are on, whether it's playing the clarinet or kung fu or whatever it is, something that engages them, the kind of enthusiasm or skill they can share with other boys. And the third element, which to me is just as important, is that any child thinking of coming to a full boarding school, particularly an all-boys one, therefore of its nature fairly competitive, should have the emotional resilience to be able to cope. Now you may say, that, goodness, that's a tall order with a 10.5, 11-year-old at an interview or from a report. But it's remarkable what you can pick up. And children are often quite revealing and forthcoming about how they are likely to connect with the opportunities they're given. I mean, at its most extreme, for example, we've had 11-year-olds being interviewed who make it very clear that being away from home, boarding is the last thing they want to do. It's dad or grandpa or whatever it is thinks it will be good for them. Well, that's not a deal breaker necessarily, but it would certainly have a red light flashing in the mind of the interviewer and of the selectors. And that would prompt a telephone conversation or a meeting with the prep school head. So I've taken a little time out there, but I just wanted to give you a slightly fuller flavour of what it's like in real time going through this kind of process. And what you will have picked out of that, of course, is the great weight placed on the relationship with the prep school head. And you've heard this from a number of people, but it is true. This isn't just some easy rhetoric. It is something that matters both ways, but it is hugely important in trying to get it right for the boy. Prep school reports over the years have changed. They used to be a little more robust in the past than perhaps they are now. But we get very good information and a very good sense of how a child will fit our particular environment. And it seems to me one of the most important things you look for when you're appointing a prep school head, as I have done as a governor on a number of occasions, is whether this is someone who's going to, whatever else, whatever other skills, whatever other competencies you're looking for, Is this person, is this man or woman going to know the children sufficiently well that they're going to be able to give really good advice about the next step? It's an important, important skill. Best report I ever had at Eton from a prep school head, lovely man who now retired from his prep school in the West Country. I suspect this might be more of a West Country thing than London. But under the section inviting any comment about the family, anything of which the school should be aware, simply wrote 4 words, which is all I needed to know. Mother mad, father bad. See, I feel comfortable in this audience telling you that because there's nobody who remotely fits that description. Earlier on, I think it was Vivian Durham who used the phrase bespoke. And that struck me as a very good word, good tailoring word, a bespoke suit, something made to fit the individual. And this is what these admissions processes are designed to do. Compare my experience with the old-fashioned direct grant grammar school. There was nothing bespoke to the individual about it at all. The admissions process was designed to suit the institution. It was easy, it was straightforward, you could claim it was transparent, nobody could really moan about it. We have gone, as a sector, as an independent sector over the last 10 or 15 years, we've gone out on a limb to make ourselves more vulnerable, if you like, because we do things in a more complex, varied way, but we do so in order to try and get it right for children. The worst thing for me as the head of a boarding school is to know that we've made a mistake about the selection of a particular child because they're going to be unhappy, they're going to be bumping along the bottom, they're going to have a miserable time. No one wants that, least of all the school. So I think you can honestly have a pretty high degree of trust in general terms about how the system operates. That's not going to mitigate your own frustration or anxiety, but at least I hope it explains something of why we are where we are. Anyway, to the second part of my text. Everything has gone well. You have arrived. You are sitting there for the sake of argument in chapel on that very first morning, having dropped your 13-year-old boy off, and you're listening to me, or as it is now, my successor, talk to you about what life is like and what's going to happen for you as parents. Well, among a number of things I was used to saying, I would always make the point in a twin-barreled way that the relationship between the school and the parents must be one where, on the one hand, you will complain, and on the other hand, you will trust. Now, the first part of that may sound rather odd. Why? I'm ahead. Why am I inviting you to complain? Shouldn't I be trying to push you away? I can't tell you what a relief it was. And listen to this, please, because it may sound counterintuitive. I can't tell you what a relief it was to have a copper-bottomed complaint from a parent. Far from my heart sagging, it would sing. Why? Because I could do something about it. What was a nightmare was the sotto voce complaint, the half-articulated thought, I don't want you to do anything about this, but I think you should know whatever. Why do parents do this? You do it, as I would run the risk of doing, because you're concerned in some way that if you make a complaint, it's going to bounce back on your child. And the last thing you want to do is have your child suffering because you've made a legitimate complaint about something. It's a strange conundrum to be in. It feels very uncomfortable. And somehow, if you can do it in a half-voice kind of way, it makes you feel a little bit better, and yet your child is going to be safe. Well, if you have a genuine concern, a real worry, make a complaint. And were it ever to be the case that your child is the subject of some vengeance from the headmaster or the school, it's game, set, and match. I would take my child away straight away. It's not the school you should have your child in. If a school was so unconfident that they were unable to face up to mistakes, which of course are made, we're all human in what is fundamentally an institution of relationships. If a school doesn't have the confidence to do that, it should not engage your confidence. So, complain, but also trust. Schools are quite complicated places to run, and I think the world has become more demanding and more complex. So being a boarding housemaster in 2015, I think in many ways is a tougher call than ever it has been. And this is for a variety of reasons. Parental expectations are pretty sky high. You're paying an absolute fortune to be in a top school. This is a major investment, and the most precious thing in your life is your child, and you want to do the very best. I get all that. I'm a parent. I feel just the same. I've been through all this. So the pressure to have expectations of the highest order is a completely natural thing. But it has to be tempered by a willingness to accept where the school is and what the school has to deal with. So, for examples, practically speaking, if you're a housemaster, what are you doing? You're probably teaching a reduced timetable. Nonetheless, you're still teaching. In Eton's case, you would teach a 2/3 of a timetable, a typical timetable. So you teach. You may have 1 or 2 lessons off when you can catch up with a bit of paperwork during the morning. You're with the boys at lunch, you get changed straight away. There's probably sport of some kind. So you're refereeing, you get back. There's probably some parents to see at that point, prospective parents. You're dealing with boys. Back teaching again for the late afternoon slot. You finish at 6, you probably have a tutorial. Grab a bite of supper. Then, of course, you've got some kind of assembly or house prayers meeting with your house. There'll be something on in the evening. Probably 1 or 2 of your boys playing in a concert. You'll want to go and support them. There may be a late meeting in the evening. Once you get back at about 10:15, you'll be on the corridors. You'll be walking the boards. One of the most important things housemasters do in a boarding environment is stay connected with children. It's those casual conversations of the evening tell you more and reveal more than pretty much anything else. And that's why in good boarding schools, the staff can be so well versed in supporting the young people for whom they care. And it's 11:30, time to go to bed. And you get back to your study and you click on the machine, and there is a raft of emails from parents, mostly expecting an answer by return. Just have the vision and the understanding to see what it is that the people looking after your son are doing. Of course, we live in an age of instant communication, and you want to have answers as swiftly as possible. But it has to be put into context, and you must trust the professional people to be doing what is right. So I'm giving a strange bifurcated message, urging you to complain when you have things you're concerned about, but also urging you to trust people who have experience, who've been around, in many cases, a long time, and have seen situations frequently before. That said, I just want to pick up 5 points briefly about things I think, as parents, and I'm going to sign up to this myself, that we should be prepared at least to think about as our children embark on a school. And of course, I'm mostly talking from my experience in a secondary school level, but it's applicable to younger years as well. So, Little's 5 points. What are they? Number 1, ask yourself the question, am I prepared, genuinely prepared, to work with the school and pull my weight? Over the years, I've seen many types of parenting and many types of parent, and most, I have to say, are utterly delightful. One of the joys for me has been able to build relationships over years with many people, quite a number of whom I'm still in contact with. But there is a style of parenting that assumes, on the one hand, that you just shut the door. Over to you. That's your lot. I'm paying the money. You give me the finished product in 5, 7, whatever years' time. And that is an abrogation of responsibility. Sure, you're paying a small fortune, a large fortune, to have your child educated, but nothing can replicate what a parent is able to contribute to that process. I'll pick that point up again in a moment. But by the same token, and I think this is particularly true at secondary level, a parent shouldn't see him or herself as a child's best mate. Now, that may seem rather an obvious thing to say, but I have seen some truly bizarre examples of parents being matey with their children. For example, turning up on a speech day with a Volvo estate crammed full of alcohol, liberally distributing it to all the son's friends in a matey, jokey, making disparaging comments about beating the beak, no one can see, go on, they're all away, all the officialdom people, being, as it were, a rather oversized adolescent, with some truly alarming consequences. said car being turned over on the cricket pitch during the middle of a speech day by drunken teenagers, other types of incident frequently involving cars as well as alcohol. But you get the picture. Maybe that's an extreme example, but I think in truth there's a bit of a twinge in all of us of wanting to be liked by our children and our children's friends. And of course that's natural and understandable. But be aware, be alert with yourself. But by the same token, join in with the school. There'll be a wide range of opportunities. And one of the changes in the boarding school world has been that parents have been much more engaged, much more willing to come in. And that is a thoroughly good thing. Schools like it. It may seem rather forbidding to turn up to a great institution, a place that's been around in Eton's case for the best part of 600 years, but actually the people inside the institution really like having parents around. It is a good thing. Second, can I strike a balance between being a Velcro parent and a ghost? I remember some years ago coming across a boy who, this is a 15, 16-year-old, who was extraordinarily feckless. Now, as all the women in the audience know, the male of the species is feckless by disposition and intuition anyway, but this was a really, incidentally, do you know, according to the latest American research, the terminal point of male adolescence? I'm asking this question of the ladies here. 16, 18, 20, any advances? Yeah, well, it's 28, actually, is the... You've got some fun ahead of you. I have to say, whenever I've used that statistic in an audience of Eton mothers and fathers, the women have always expressed surprise and disbelief because they know they're married to an adolescent, so they tell me. So what do I mean by a Velcro parent? Well, this case of this feckless boy who seems singularly incapable of organising anything for himself, always late, always in the wrong place at the wrong time, driving his housemaster to distraction. Eventually, when we had the family, it took a while for us really to uncover this. The father, who was a very pleasant man and very concerned about his son, couldn't see what the problem was, just couldn't somehow see, why is my son like this? It turned out that when the boy was at home, each day he received a printed out pro forma detailing what the boy's movements would be by the minute through the day. 9:06, you will be doing this. He was, not surprisingly, perhaps separated from his wife, who lived in London a few streets away. 10:32, taken by chauffeur to mother. 10:58, picked up by chauffeur from her. I've never seen such an extreme example. So for this poor boy, coming to school was holiday. It was relief from the pressures of home. Now that is Velcro parenting, perhaps at its most extreme, but in some shape or form, I've seen this on many occasions. For example, a couple of years ago, we had a 13-year-old boy at Eton, bags round the eyes, not settling, unhappy, a bit of a worry, certainly the matron, the dame in the house, very exercised about it. We discovered this boy's mother was ringing him on the hour every hour on his mobile, including at night. And this, I have to say, was a mum who just couldn't let go. And whilst that's an extreme example, of course it's a natural thing. As a mother, it's your child. But we have to be prepared to give space. But by the same token, not be that old-fashioned drop them off. As I sometimes say, only half in jest, I'm of the generation, I went to boarding school, I'm of the generation when I was dropped off at the beginning of the term, and in a good year I was picked up at the end of it. You know, that's kind of, that's pretty much what it felt like. And we don't want that. We don't want those kind of attitudes or habits. There's a fine balance to be struck. Third, can I support my child and support the school through difficult times? Let me give you a positive example, an example of the way I used to like to play it with serious disciplinary problems or serious issues we're dealing with young people. Not of the type where you're showing the red card and they're going out of the door, which is always a desperately sad situation, but happens. I'm talking about the situations where which can be redeemed, but which take work. I would frequently have the whole family in, find an opportunity to park the boy outside, talk to the parents and ask them to play a game with me, to play parts in a piece of theatre. I would explain exactly what we're going to do, where we hope to get. I asked them to stay silent when I brought the boy back in. I would talk to the boy, I'd play the bad cop, I'd make it very heavy with them, and they were to express pained resignation, but be supportive. Just play it along with me. And and part of the reason for saying this to the parents was for them to realize that the heavy way I treated the boy wasn't actually innate. It wasn't, I didn't feel it. I didn't mean it in that way. It's a way to produce a desired effect. And it usually worked. I could really spell it out in a most emphatic way, being far, far tougher with a boy than I ever would normally in front of parents, because the parents were on side, playing their part in trying to make this recalcitrant 15-year-old get the message. This is real, this matters. And it's a brilliant example, I think, of parents not being matey, but doing their job as parents with a school, trying to find the best way forward for a child. 4, can I suppress my frustrated ambitions and let my child be herself? A little bit of personal history, when I went to university to read law, and I had the good wit, even though I was a little slow, to read law for slightly less than 2 days. My only notable distinction, I'd actually worked out it wasn't the thing for me. My father, who'd left school at 14, was devastated because being a lawyer was a proper job. It showed momentum. When I then announced I was thinking of being a teacher, it was beyond his comprehension. It's a complete waste of an education. He had a perception in his head. In truth, we all do. I did. As my daughter was growing up, I had these romantic notions of what she might be. All of us have children who are going to be at least Prime Minister. We know, we've been there. But we have to find a way to let that be parked to one side and allow children to develop their own lives. And that, again, is a part of the trust you need to place in your child's school, that between you, you will create the environment where your child will make the right choice rather than impose. And this is also true of university choice, by the way. I went to Cambridge, of course my child is going to Cambridge. Well, maybe, but maybe that's not the right thing. And 5th, and here you will hear the frustrations of a head, will I deflect rumour and find out the facts from the school? I can't tell you the bizarre stories that have come back to me from dinner parties about what it is alleged something or other has happened. I mean, we all love rumour. This is why soap operas exist, and is largely why we have a press in the way that we do. We love salacious stories and all the stuff that goes around with it. When I started at Oakham School, lovely co-educational school, at the end of the first week, I had a deputation from some senior girls who told me they'd heard on good authority that I was going to ban the traditional kilt and make them wear tartan hot pants. They'd been wound up brilliantly by a group of boys who purported to claim that this was the truth. Schools in particular thrive on rumour, and it's well worth going back to the school when your child tells you something or other and checking out the facts. So don't believe a rumour, especially if it comes from your own child. You can actually put yourself in some pretty embarrassing positions. You need to check it. And it's not that your child will be lying, it's that they've just picked up the rumour mill. So there we are. Those are some thoughts about what we might do. And we're coming to the end of our time, but I was struck by Joe Spence talking about his that lovely story, 2 lovely stories about prep schools. So given that we have this continuity expressed in this splendid conference today, I'm going to finish with my favourite prep school moment. And it was some years ago, I was visiting a prep school, and there were 11 and 12-year-old boys and girls in the class writing about what they were going to do in the future. I dutifully walked up and down the rows, and I looked over the child's piece of work. And he had written that he was going to be something he was spelling as C-A-R-P-A-T, second word, L-A-Y-E-R. Now, the sharp-eared amongst you will realise there's clearly a spelling mistake there, an A for an E. So I said, tell me, why do you want to be a carpet layer? And this boy turned and looked at me with the utmost indignation and said, I am going to be a corporate lawyer. A lot of what we've been hearing about today is ambition and realism. It's about complaints and trust. It's about the balance and the perspective. Well, there's a good example. An ambition that perhaps needs to be tempered. And as I say to boys, at the very least, you should learn what to spell and how to spell it when you're applying for jobs. So thank you for listening, and thank you for being here today.